today's webinar hosted by Credit to Be. I'm Justin Warden, the product specialist here at Credit to Be, and I'm joined by Scott Wolf, the CEO of Lien, who will be presenting today on shielding your business from financial risks with mechanics liens rights. A few items to get out of the way before we begin. If you do have any questions throughout the course of today's presentation, you can feel free to put them in the questions function in your side panel. We will take all those questions and save them for a Q&A at the end of the presentation. We also will have a brief survey that pops up as you exit the webinar. It only takes about 30 seconds to fill out, but it gives us a lot of great insight into how we can continue to make our webinar offerings better for you. A couple other things. We do have a copy of the handouts available for you. They are under the handouts section of your side panel. You can feel free to download those and follow along with Scott as he presents today. I believe that's everything that I have. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Scott and let him begin today's presentation.
Thanks, Justin. As Justin mentioned, my name is Scott Wolf. I'm the CEO of Lien. This is a little bit about me, and it's in the slide packet, so I won't spend very much time on this. But this is a company that I founded. We're a SaaS product, a software as a service product that does lien rights management for all 50 states. And you can learn a little bit more about me if you go into one of these two links. I'm also, my background is as a construction attorney, which is how I came to stumble upon knowing anything about liens, making me one of you guys probably, because y'all all probably interact with liens and lien rights and lien waivers and these sorts of things. But today I'm going to share a little bit with you about what we know, or what I know about mechanic lien history, mechanic lien law, and how it impacts credit teams and finance teams and people who are finance professionals like yourselves. And let's get started. So I think we're going to start off with a little bit of background. And sometimes, even though folks know about, everyone has different levels, especially here in the webinar when you bring a bunch of attendees in like this. Everyone has different levels of understanding of the lien laws, and sometimes people have exposure to how it works in a single state. Sometimes people have exposure to a region or nationally. But it's good actually to step back. I like to look at these macroly, step back and think about mechanic liens overall, and what in the world these things are really for, and how the policy behind them works, because it really sheds light on how to manage it, and it sheds light on some of the challenges that you face and how to approach it. This is our agenda today, this slide here, and so you can see we're about to enter into lien history and background. We're going to move on after that with regard specifically to preliminary notices, because the role of preliminary notices is sort of the glue behind mechanic lien rights. And then we're going to talk about challenges, practical challenges for credit teams, and some. And when I say practical challenges, sometimes challenges may be as we'll see, sometimes they may be with regards to understanding how to use the tool and how challenges in actually using lien rights. But then you may also have challenges that have nothing to do with using it. It may just have to do with the sentiment that people have about lien rights. There's a lot of sensitivity to liens in the marketplace, and that's a challenge for you as a finance professional, even though it may not be an actual written problem. And then we're going to look at some example data about how lien rights have helped or how they impact financial performance, and what kind of data you can look at to figure out the connection between this lien process, this security rights process that people invest to varying degrees. People invest different amount of resources and money into the process. And so how can you look at the process in connection with some data and see where it's connected? How is this process paying off for you or not paying off for you? And we're going to do some polling today, and we're going to have some questions at the end. So, and as Justin had explained. So let's get started with the history and the background on mechanic liens. So what this is you may be, as a credit person or finance person or accountant, you may be anywhere on this chart, but you're likely, since you're a part of this webinar, you're likely at the bottom of the chart or towards the bottom. And construction projects don't always look like this. Sometimes you may be supplying or providing work directly for an owner, and it may be a small project. And then it's just a spectrum. Some projects are really small and involve a few parties, and some projects become really complex and involve a lot of parties. When they get more complex, they sort of have this look. And the reason why we have red and green colors here is to kind of display where the financial risk falls. And financial risk is the term we use for understanding the risk of losing money. Everybody who's managing credit, you're managing your credit risk. You're looking at it and trying to determine what's my credit risk on this project or with this customer. And every project has financial risk or credit risk, whether you're a supplier looking at the sub, there's some credit risk there. If you're a general contractor looking at the sub, there's a credit risk there as well. And what's interesting about construction, unlike a lot of other industries, is that everybody who's in this chart, as you can see from the left, work gets done, and people are putting all materials and all labor into a project on credit. And then after the work's done, it's billed and invoiced, and then the money starts coming down. And the more complex the project, the more this is a working capital constraint. The more that the more levels that the money has to go through and that the invoicing has to go through, the longer it takes for the money to trickle down. And since you would put more time and more layers, the more complex the financial risk becomes. And that's just a little bit of background into the way maybe a way to look at financial risk on these projects. So this is an interesting topic about the construction industry, and it has a lot of history. And so you may wonder, like, where did these liens even come from? And they actually come from a long time ago. They were introduced by Thomas Jefferson, who everyone knows, in 1791. It was a brand new concept, a very novel concept, and it was there and introduced to address that risk, and specifically to address a specific intricacy of the risk, which is the fact that people are providing materials to someone else. People are doing labor for someone else. And what Thomas Jefferson and Maryland was looking at was saying, you know what, we don't really have a banking system in America that's reliable. We don't have a credit system in America that's very reliable. We have all this land. We're giving all this land away, and it needs to be developed. How can we make people feel better about investing into the property, into the land? And what they came up with was a security rights process, where looking at, if you provide the materials to a piece of property, if you provide labor to a piece of property and you are improving it, then you shouldn't be the one who has the financial risk. So it's very simple. If you provide to another and you don't get paid, you have protection. Now, this was really controversial at the time, and it was also really unique. You wouldn't have had in England, under common law, the ability for people to, like for a carpenter to go in and take a landowner's home because they didn't get paid for doing the carpentry work. But in America, which is now a global principle, we believe that people should get paid. If you don't pay your employees at your company, the employees can go to the Department of Labor. And similarly, with suppliers and subcontractors, if you don't get paid, you have protection. This was introduced. Mechanics lien legislation has been adopted in all 50 states then, and similar security rights exist across multiple industries all across the globe. And the fountainhead for that is Thomas Jefferson and this new concept. Now, if you want to know a little bit more about liens and how they work, we have a presentation we did about 4 years ago, and it's available online. And there's a number of places where there are links in this presentation, and this is one place where there are links. And this is a really good presentation that kind of goes through 17 different effects that mechanics liens have, which causes parties on the project and causes parties within your account it frees up money, it creates leverage, and what are the things that a lien actually does? What does the lien actually do? So that's a good presentation to go to get an insight into that. It's a very quick read, And I won't go into the details of it in this presentation. But I do want to stop for a second and have a poll, our first polling question, which is which Justin will take over, I think, correct?
Correct. So everyone, we will be launching a polling question at this time. You should see it come up on your screen. At this point, you're able to choose the option that most suits you. The question that we have is, how familiar are you with mechanics, liens, and bond claim requirements? The options you have are very familiar, somewhat unfamiliar, and very unfamiliar. So I'll give everyone a few seconds, let them have the chance to vote at this time. I'll leave the poll open for about 5 more seconds while we're still getting some responses. All right. Looks like I have pretty much everyone voted, so I'm going to close the poll and share the results with everyone. So, Scott, so you know, we have 6% who say they are very familiar.
I can see it, Justin. I got it.
Okay, perfect.
But you can still read it.
48% that are somewhat familiar, 24% that are somewhat unfamiliar, and 21% that are very familiar.
Great. Great. Well, that's good. We're going to go through some of these requirements, and I won't exhaust the people who know very much about it, but I also won't exhaust with really in-depth knowledge for people who don't know very much about it at all. But I think you'll get a sense in the presentation for what the actual requirements are. A little bit more, one other thing about the history, or one other thing to look at with regards to history and background. We're going to go into this at the end when we start looking at data. When you say, what do mechanics lien do? What is the effect of the mechanics lien? That's one thing. The other thing is, like, what happens? Why do we even care about lien rights? Why does our company spend money on tracking this really esoteric, complicated process? And the reason is that when you look at the data associated with companies that have really good lien policies and spend and concentrate on this, you see their DSO is better on projects that have security rights versus projects that don't. And you see that the collection percentages overall are better for projects that have security rights versus those that don't. And that's just some of the things that the lien process can do, and we'll get into it in a little bit later, like I mentioned, towards the end. And just some very high-level things here. And what makes the lien process unique, really unique for people who have a connection to the construction industry. If you're doing building material supplies in the construction industry, or equipment rental, or if you're a trade contractor or a group of construction outfits. What it's designed for is to provide you almost insurance against any financial risk. A really spectacular lien policy can almost insulate you completely from having any risk of non-payment on a project. Now, there's some practical challenges that we'll address that make this a little bit, it isn't like a 100% lien insurance policy, as people very familiar with the process will know, but it's really, really good. And it can be really, really good if you have the right control over it. It's not very expensive compared to the effect that it gives, especially. It's not very expensive. It has high impact. And your lien rights is something that exists. It's been given to people like you. It's been given to your companies. It's been given to you guys by Thomas Jefferson. And it's a very strong public policy all across America in favor of making sure the lien rights work for you. And a note we have here, which we'll address in a second, is don't let other people control them. They're yours. You don't necessarily have to have other people control them. So that brings us to the role of preliminary notices, which is the next section here. So really quickly, we have this, this little note. And I call it being in a secured position. And what I mean by that is you have AR. Everybody has people who owe them money. And that money can be either secured or unsecured. If it's secured, it means that you have collateral to back up the event that you don't get paid. There's some collateral, just like a bank has collateral. Your AR can have collateral. With liens, and what we'll get into is you don't necessarily have the collateral perfected. It's not in your control. It's a right that you have. And you can lose that right, or you can forego that right. And the idea that we use this term being in a secured position is that if you look at your AR You say, okay, I have AR that is in a secured position. It is in a position where I can still get that collateral. If you fall out of that position, you're in an unsecured position. And being in a secured position provides really big benefits to contractors and suppliers. You don't need to file the lien to be in a secured position. You don't need to file the lien to get the benefit. Just being in the position is a benefit, which we'll show. And it's public policy to provide that security to people who are in the construction industry. So, is everyone always secure? Are you always, what distinguishes between when you're in a secured position and when you're not in a secure position? So with that, we have another polling question, Justin, and which I'll let him take over about what percentage of AR your company secures uses security for now, and I'll let Justin take over there.
All right, so we have the next polling question up on your screen here. As Scott said, the question is, what percentage of AR does your company secure with lien rights? The options are: we do not secure lien rights, we secure a small portion of lien rights, secure a large portion, or we secure lien rights for all of our AR. So again, I'll give everyone a couple of seconds, let them look at the options and vote accordingly. All right, it looks like I've got the majority of votes in, so I'm going to close the poll and show the results again. So as we can see, we have 17% who do not secure lien rights, 48% who secure a small portion, 20% who secure a large portion, and 15% who secure lien rights for all of their AR.
Cool. So there's an interesting question here about the poll that actually isn't in our polling list, but I'll just pose it not to get responses. But when you see things like that there's a different percentage of people who do all or a small amount. So we take care of this on a small amount versus we take care of this on everything. There's different overhead associated with that. It's hard to secure everything. It's an effort, especially if you have a lot of AR and a lot of accounts. It's a substantial effort to make sure it's all secured. So there's a certain investment you make in that. And so a good question may be like, why? Why are you not securing all of your lien rights? Is it because you choose not to, because it's you don't want the security on it? Is it because it's a relationship issue with the customer? Is it because it's too much investment to do it, or it's hard to do it in certain things? So that's an interesting question that companies should dig into with respect to why they make decisions, and we'll get into this a little bit later, which is why we make decisions about when we secure versus when we don't secure, and what are the impacts of those decisions, and where should maybe we adjust those. And it could be adjusting for the better or the worse. It could be adjusting to have less security or more security. But just thinking through is important about the why, asking the why, being like a child, looking at the question, well, why is it that way? Let's go up and let's see why we made that decision. Why is that? And then go up. And you sometimes get to some insights that are useful for improving the policy and improving the way that you use these rules. So with regards to these preliminary notices and protecting lien rights, I talk about the role of preliminary notices here. Lien and security rights granted by Thomas Jefferson all over the country, in parts of the rest of the world. Security rights exist in multiple industries. They're really strong. I always, when we train new employees here at Lien, and we're talking about lien rights, I tell them, you know what? I can hire somebody to come into this building and paint that wall. And they'll paint that wall, and they'll charge me $350. And if I don't pay that $350, that painter can come and take this property, sell it at foreclosure, and get his $350 plus attorney's fees. And I've lost my property because I didn't pay for that wall. That's an absurd kind of thought, that for such a small project, they could take the whole building. Not likely, because there's no way we would let the whole building be sold for $350. But it's an interesting thought, and it underscores the strength of these rules. They're very strong. So you got to think about the other side there. If the rules are really, really strong, what about the balance of that? Because obviously property owners and lenders and title insurance companies, they don't like the fact that their property rights are so vulnerable to disputes over payments about construction work. So over the course of the past 200 years, and you know it if you're very familiar with lien laws, they get changed and things happen almost weekly. There's a case about mechanical lien laws coming out somewhere that kind of tweaks what happens with these things or how these things are handled. And so there's a balancing act here. So there's a lot of things that courts and laws have done and legislatures have done to protect the other side. We've protected the people who are doing the work and providing materials with the lien laws. What about these other people who have property rights? So I'll break it down like this. Liens were created to protect subcontractors and suppliers. That is there to protect you. The balance is notices and lien waivers, which we won't get into today, but it's a very important and painful topic for people because there's a lot of pain in dealing with lien waivers. But notices are not like liens. Notices are not for people who have lien rights. Notices are there for the other people. They're to protect the owners, the lenders, the contractors, the sureties. All those people have gotten together over the past 200 years to lobby the legislatures and have gotten notices part of the law for them. It's there for them. And there's actually, some of these laws are so strong, there are certain notices in the lien process that you could actually be fined for not sending. And that is not, now these fines don't come around often. They usually get coupled with some other type of discipline that the contractor licensing authority is given onto a subcontractor, and they very rarely happen to suppliers because the suppliers don't have the same licensing schemes. But there are some licensing rules in Tennessee, California, Arizona, Nevada, Washington, Oregon that make it a crime, that make it a penalty, a disciplinary penalty, not to send notices. And in Tennessee, it's actually a misdemeanor. In Tennessee, there are certain notices in a lien process that is a misdemeanor to not send. Again, it doesn't get really prosecuted ever, but it's worth a note, right? It's worth a note about the seriousness of these notices and why they're there. Frequently, you'll see people hesitant sometimes to send notices because they think it's going to upset their customers, and that's true, and that gets to the practical challenges here that we'll talk about in a second. But they're actually, that's a misunderstanding. The notices are there for them. The notices are there for them so much that the laws are actually made it a crime not to send it to them because they have lobbied to try to get it that way. Smart companies always send preliminary notices, or try to always send preliminary notices, for a reason. It's and there's even though the notices are for the owners and the general contractors, it helps people who are subcontractors and suppliers and people who will furnish into the project, because these notices prioritize your invoices above others. People who didn't send the notice get deprioritized. And there's actually, I don't have it in here, it's a slide that got removed, but there's actually software that owners and GCs use. There's a number of them: GC Pay, Easy Net Pay, Textura, now Viewpoint. I think Procore is about to get into it, where it helps companies manage who has sent preliminary notices and who hasn't. And frequently, companies actually will put together spreadsheets of who sent the notice and who hasn't. And when it comes time to issue payments, guess who pay first? They always pay the ones with notices because those are the ones they earmark. They'll pay with joint checks, they'll pay with regular checks, but nevertheless, there's definitely priority given to notices, and we see that time and time again, which is one of the reasons why a secured project is usually in a better credit position than an unsecured project. That's a little intro to why liens exist. This is a short intro. I could go on. We could go on for a long time about this, but that's why it exists, and a little bit about the role of preliminary notices as a yin and a yang to the lien. Let's talk about some challenges here. There's a lot of challenges for credit teams with the mechanics lien process. First off, it's complicated. It's like sales tax. Sales tax is different in every state. It's different in every county. It's different depending on what you're selling. Lien laws are very similar to that. They're very, very complicated. They're different everywhere. There is no national lien law. Every state has their own thing, and every state's been perverted by that balancing act. You have the top of the chain, the payers, the payees, the bottom of the chain. These parties have lobbied states for over 200 years, and they all have created these different Frankenstein laws that sometimes don't make any sense, because there's such compromises between everybody's different positions. And it's really hard for people to dot every I, cross every T with regards to those laws. It's a manual process for a lot of companies, unfortunately, and that leads to a lot of human error and costly mistakes. And manual work drains resources, and it makes you scratch your head and go, why are we doing all this work? So that's some obstacles from a high level. I'm going to skip this one and look at this, what we call the Lien Genome. So one of the things, this is a graphic from our website. There's a lot of different rules that I mentioned here. So the complication here. So if you look in these squares, then you see the different types of documents that are out there: liens, waivers, bond claims, stop notices, preliminary notices, which go by different names, notice of intent to liens, retainage notices, prompt payment regulations. These are different depending on whether you're on a state, county, federal, residential, commercial, heavy highway job. They're different depending if you're a subcontractor, a subcontractor, a supplier, an equipment renter, a lender, an architect, a contractor. The interlace of all these different rules creates a scenario where there's over 100,000 different combinations of rules. And the more involved you are on projects across the country, and more involved you are at different levels in the construction process and different types of construction projects, the more complicated compliance will be for your company. And it's really hard to master 100,000 different variations. So this brings us to another question, and we'll get into this slide in a second, of the polling question that I'll hand off to Justin to learn a little bit more about the kind of challenges you guys face with the different variations.
All right, so I've launched the next polling question. That question is, how many states does your company operate in? So everyone can select the choice that goes along with their company's operations. At this point, while we are waiting for some polling answers to come in, I would like to remind everyone that there will be a brief survey that pops up as they exit the webinar. Again, it only takes about 30 seconds to fill out, but we do get a lot of great information from that. Looks like everyone has answered, so I'm going to close and share the results. We've got 54% of companies operating in 1 to 5 states, 9% in 6 to 10 states, another 9% in 11 to 25 states, and then 28% in over 25 states.
Great, thank you, Justin. So it looks like, interestingly, we have and actually I think that's kind of par for the course. You have some people who are in the 1 to 5 category and some people in the 26 to 50 category. That's the two ends of the spectrum, which are full, and then the middle is a little bit shorter or a little bit smaller. There's different challenges for these different groups. People in 1 to 5 states, they have less intricacies with the differences between the states, but they're usually maybe having to deal with they don't necessarily have as big of credit teams or as big of finance teams, and so they don't have the same amount of resources that a huge company will have, or a bigger company will have that operates in multiple states. And the smaller the team is, the harder it is to allocate enough resources to having a master of these rules. And then when somebody leaves, then all your lean institutional knowledge walks out the door, and you have to hope that they can pass it on to somebody else. And it's a hard thing to pass on from one hire to another, from one department to another. Bigger companies, or companies that, even small companies who operate in multiple states, that just makes the overhead more significant. Now they have a lot of different intricacies, and it starts to become really unbearable unless you have the lean law master wizard that is in your building. And even then, it's so intricate. This is something that I dedicate my life to. These lien laws. There's very few people who spend as much time learning about this as I do. And when somebody comes to me and asks a question, it's almost like, man, that's a hard question. It's not. I have to go to the database and look it up. It's hard. So preliminary notice requirements is what this slide is. We're going to get into, just not to go into all the different types of rules, just to give you a little overview of how different it could be. This is for private projects. The projects that are commercial or residential. And it simplifies it a little bit because it combines commercial and residential. But it could be even more fragmented than that. And then you also have one that you do for state projects and one you can do for federal projects. But you can see that sometimes notice is required and sometimes it's not. And it's pretty random, but it's different. And the time that you have to send the notice is different everywhere. And what the notice must say is different everywhere. And who must receive the notice is different everywhere. And how they must receive it. Should it be certified mail? Should it be certified return receipt? Should it be registered mail? Should it have restricted delivery? A lot of companies simplify this by just saying, we'll send a certified return receipt all the time. That's not actually a good idea. There's a lot of problems with doing that, or possible problems, and you're wasting money because you're sending it with return receipt when you don't necessarily have to. But nevertheless, this shows some of the fragmented, and so does this one. There's a lot of rules against, and this kind of highlights the public policy interest. We mentioned that it's really hard it's really hard to understate how much American states and America in general wants people to have lien rights. It's actually illegal to let people waive lien rights in their construction contract in all states but 3. It's sometimes it'll cost a general contractor their license if they have something in their contract that says you must waive lien rights. It's also, just like the notice rules, is a misdemeanor in some states to require somebody or to ask someone to waive their lien rights before their work began, and sometimes before payment was issued. So lien right, but again, this underscores the policy behind it, but it also underscores the differences in how it just matters where you are sometimes. How are lien deadlines calculated? There are different time frames associated with lien deadlines, and there are different methodologies. Some states will calculate your lien deadlines by looking at when you last furnished to the project. Some states will look at when the project itself ended. So when did everyone stop furnishing on the project? And again, it's different depending on where you are and what is the type of project and what have you. Getting managing all this is possible, but it's hard, and it's inefficient, and it's manual, and it's error prone. You got to navigate laws to figure out all these different nuances, of which there are over 100,000. You got to research job data and property information. You got to scrub your data to figure out who should get the notices, who shouldn't, who should we be securing, who we shouldn't be securing. You should have some methodology associated with that, which adds a layer of complication. You have to keep track of all these deadlines. You got to view security status on a high volume of projects sometimes, which brings you into a needle in a haystack problem. You got to keep track of all this mail you're sending. You got to send all this mail. It's a really resource-heavy process, and every company has a process for it. And sometimes companies have been doing it for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and they like their process for doing it. But if you start peeling the onion, it's a process, and the process is expensive. It just may be running okay, but it's still expensive and maybe not super efficient. Those are some practical challenges, but all those practical challenges deal with the process itself. I want to get into some practical challenges that don't necessarily deal with managing lien rights and using the process, but instead deal with the sensitivity around liens in the industry and dealing with the human element, the customers, and how people perceive lien rights. And for that, we have another poll question from Justin, and he'll put it up.
All right, so launching the poll question again. This question is, what is your biggest challenge regarding lien and bond claim security? The options we have are understanding complicated lien laws and requirements, managing the process for a large volume of projects in AR, preserving customer relationships while asserting lien rights, and obtaining the necessary data to adhere to lien laws. So, as we have been, I will give everyone a few seconds to answer these questions, and then we will be sharing the results shortly. All right, it looks like we've gotten everyone to vote. So I will close and share. We have 34% saying that understanding complicated lien laws and requirements are the biggest challenge, 14% saying managing the process for a large volume, 34% saying preserving customer relationships, and 17% saying obtaining the necessary data to adhere to the lien laws.
Great. So this is that's exactly, that seems, you know, the first part, the two majorities there were the 34% are understanding the complex requirements, which are some of the things we just went through. It's definitely a pain point. It's definitely a problem. The other 34%, or the third of folks, are talking about navigating the sensitivity of liens and kind of being between a rock and a hard place of what to keep the security rights alive, but also tending to these very sensitive relationships that you have with your customers. And you don't want to be adverse to your customers. It's no fun to be adverse to your customers. You're supposed to be on the same side of your customers. So this is kind of what we have, this tug of war between lien rights on the left and strong protection that's available using lien rights, and how it can be really beneficial to your financial group. On the other side, you have all the headwinds: preserving your relationships, dealing with cash flow challenges, managing different GC procedures. GCs, especially with regards to lien waivers, you're kind of forced to jump through all types of hoops with regards to how a lien waiver is required, and that can be very frustrating and hard to deal with. And then the complex rules, which we addressed a moment ago. We have an article that I had written for E&R magazine, which you can, again, the link is here on the page, and it talks about this. And the title of the article is "End in Unfair Terms." It kind of goes to the root of why we started Lien. Lien was started because we see the sensitivity here in the unfairness, and believe that collaboration around payment is required in such a multi-person or multi-party payment cycle. But the lien gets in the way. That's all that lien rights are the best way to manage lien rights. But the whole thing about security rights is, ideally, a company wants to just get it out of the way. Everybody wants to have lien rights. The people who are paying want to avoid lien rights. But all the tools out there are helping everybody kind of out leverage one another, and you really just want to get it out the way so that you can go on with your day and go on with the business you have with these contractors. Develop a trusting relationship with repeat business, and everybody being able to collaborate on that. So this is a quote from that article, which it's just one page, and it's like, the liens are powerful tools that entangle the parties with whom the subcontractor must work. So it entangles you with the people who you must work with. And worrying about anger in upper tier parties causes subcontractors to walk on eggshells and even forfeit their rights either by action or inaction. And sometimes that trickles down to the suppliers. The more your subcontractors working on eggshells, the more pressure you're going to get from your customer to walk on eggshells. And so you're in you're in between a rock and a hard place, and it's not a comfortable place to be in. So what can credit and finance teams do here? One thing is around lien and notice policies. So the first thing is, a lot of companies don't have this, or they don't have it written, or they haven't, like I said, they go act like a child and start digging. Why do we do this? Why do we do this? Ask why, and get to a policy, just some sort of procedure that you can follow. So you can have consistent decision-making, efficient decision-making, and it can guide you or managers, minimize some guesswork about how you're going to approach each different situation. And this can be as exclusive as you want. You can take away your company's security rights on projects related to different types of customers, different categories of customers. We'll have an example of that in a moment. You can also leverage technology, and there's a lot of really interesting technology out there. As Credit to Be is an example of this. The world is becoming really, really cool if you are into technological solutions, and they have the way this technology can be so beneficial to helping you do certain things better. And when we started this company, Lien, I was practicing construction law at the time. I was dealing with suppliers who were coming to me, and they had all these crazy, intricate processes of handling lien rights. They were frequently in bad situations, and it's like I had some software development experience as well. And I looked at it, I said, man, this is exactly what a computer is good for. This is what computers do best. You can help you automate and a lot of tasks: data entry, research, job data information, notification, deadline tracking, getting documents generated, getting documents delivered. And in particular, you look at these tools here. Like you can use different things. Is this a new customer or an old customer? How did they behave in the past with payment? How is the general contractor that's on this project, or the owner? What type of project is it? How big is the project? All these different variables can go in to create very sophisticated workflows for you that help you be ahead of these complex decisions. That may be, number one, helps you with the complex regulations, because on the one hand, the regulations are difficult to keep your finger on, and a computer would be really good at that. But on the other hand, the relationships are difficult as well. And surprisingly, computers are getting really, really good about helping manage relationships and helping to distinguish between sensitive and unsensitive situations, and letting you take certain behaviors with that. And we get into now the final section, which regards data and reporting, which is how do computers actually help in this? How can you help use data to guide your lien policy, use data to guide your lien decisions? What is it that the lien rights are doing for you? Everybody's, from some of the surveys, everybody's investing here in this webinar a varying amount of resources into your lien rights. Why is that? Here's some samples of things that an example report, for example. Instead of dealing with all the minutia of all these things, you could get a very simple overview of your security rights. What are the things that are most valuable to me this week? What are things that are coming up? Let the computer crunch all those complex things and just give you an overview. Just give me a sample. Just tell me what I need to know. Where do my policy already make decisions for me, and where do I need to make decisions? The other thing you can do is you can think about how your decisions are impacting your AR. So one thing that we do, for example, is we give people the ability to automate certain tasks, and then we give people the ability to put certain tasks into a queue where they can decide whether they want to proceed with the security right or not. And when they choose not to, they tell us why. They tell the machine why. They say, well, because we already promised payment, so we're not going to follow lien. This is a relationship decision. Our invoices were incorrect. And then you can start to report on all those decisions you're making and say, hey, you know what? When we are promised payment, the DSO is 52 days. When we have a relationship decision, the DSO is 57 days. And sometimes those things expose to you areas where your policy should change. And that's how you can tune your policy and start making it more responsive to the realities of how you're dealing with how you're managing your AR and how you're using this tool. So here's I'm going to get into this slide and explain what this slide means. We have our final polling question now. It's a true or false one. It's easy.
All right, we'll launch that last polling question. True or false? Growth is an important objective for my company.
Give me.
All right. Looks like we've got the vast majority of people have voted in. If anyone does want to put in a last-minute vote, feel free to now. All right, and we'll share that. And surprise, it looks like 100% of companies are looking to grow.
Yeah, good thing we asked that one. Everybody likes to grow. So this is what stops companies from growing. We speak to a lot of credit teams and finance teams, and the great teams, the great accounting or finance professionals, they know that they're not just there to run numbers. They're not there to say no. They're there to enable the company's objectives. And the company's objectives are to keep the lights on and to grow. And lien rights don't have to be adverse to that. And in fact, we have really good proof from a lot of our users that lien rights are actually support that. And this is an example. This is real data. We don't use we don't expose who this is. This is real data. And this particular user separated their customers into red customers and green customers. Red is a risky customer. We're gonna have to do. We need to go through some gymnastics to offer them credit. We're not going to do business with them because it's going to be it is a high risk here. Green customers are going to do business with no matter what. These are good customers. They approve them and they fly in through. This user uses Z-Lien for the green customers. Excuse me, uses Z-Lien for the red customers. And you can see when they started to use Z-Lien, it's probably around 2009, 2009 or so. And what you see is the percentage of their revenue that is risky. Most of their growth came from opening up the doors to more revenue, and they were able to open up the doors to more revenue because they got really, really comfortable with the lien process. They knew that the security rights were there on these situations, and that allowed them to really open the door to more situations. And you can see the percentage of their revenue as compared to risky revenue, or the percentage of risky revenue as compared to non-risk revenue, it grew substantially and became a real strong component of their growth. And this is a really interesting look at what, a lot of people think about lien rights and think about it as a risk mitigation tool. But strong credit teams and strong accounting and finance teams look at it and go, wow, what this does? This makes our risk easier, and this empowers us to give more to more customers. Another example we have is from a user who's a subcontractor nationally who has a very high volume of projects. They are we did a webinar with them, and you can look at the webinar at that link. So there's a link on the page, and you can watch the webinar there. They had a lot of problems when they first started. It was a manual, fragmented process that was spread across multiple vendors. Different regions were handling the process differently. They were unable. They didn't even know how much they spent on this stuff. They didn't know very much about what liens they had. Like, how many liens do you have filed today? Well, I don't know. When do those liens expire? There was no centralized way for them to look at that. They wanted to reduce their manual work. They wanted to improve DSO. They wanted to have this process work for their financial performance, and they wanted to just get their thumb on it and figure it out. So I'll skip through you can watch the webinar, you can look at this to kind of see some of the performance here. But what you see is the left side is the extra amount was collected in each bucket with Z-Lien versus non-Z-Lien. So by staying in a secure position, if you compared the projects that were secured with us versus those that were not secured, they were collecting substantially more. At 0 to 30 days, 10% more. At 61 to 90 days, 10% more than if they weren't. And then they started to collect a lot of money on the backs of liens and notice of intent because they knew exactly when to leverage their rights and when to use these lien rights. Another company, and this is a really interesting one too, and this goes to the vision of our product and the vision of Thomas Jefferson and the vision of all these rules that exist to protect lien rights. And that is that it goes, notices again are not for the people who are furnishing materials and furnishing liens. We watch time and time again, because we get a lot of liens filed on our platform. Almost every lien gets canceled within like 7 to 10 days. These are not real complex disputes. These liens are communication problems. They're transparency problems. That's why these liens get filed, and that's why they get cleared up so quickly. So the question is, how do we get in front of that? And there are some ways technologically that we work on to get in front of that. But one way, non-technologically, is just send notice. The more that people send notice, the less they have to lien. And that makes it's because it's not an adverse positioning tool. It's a communication device, and that's something that we see in the data consistently as well. And that is it for, so I think we're going to move into some questions now with Justin. I'll tell you that this is, we're happy. We have some people here if you guys want to learn more about us. One of the things that we pride ourselves on from Lien's standpoint is that we make lien rights easy. That's our promise. We want to make this easy, and we want to make this fast, and we want to do it accurately, and we want to make it fair for all parties that are involved in the payment cycle. For webinar attendees today, you can email Danny@Lien.com to redeem, but we will give you a free trial of our software for 14 days, and we'll actually give you $150. We'll give you $150 of postage that you can just use to send whatever you want to send. Notices, notice of intent to liens. If you have projects, you can email Danny. You'll get an account. He'll put $150 in your postage tracker, and you can send things off and no cost at all, and you have $150 to spend. So happy to do that for the people today, and I'm excited to see if we have any questions here.
All right, thank you very much, Scott. I just wanted to remind everyone again, if you do have any questions, you can feel free to put them in that questions function in your side panel, and I'll be sure to pose them to Scott before we wrap the webinar today. I do want to again remind everyone that if you would like a copy of the slides, they are available in the handout section for you to print out, as well as we will be emailing a copy of the slides to everyone who is on the webinar today. So with that, we have our first question here. The question is, we exchange conditional waivers, and how much weight do the waivers carry versus actual liens?
So this is waivers. Lien waivers are really another pain point when you think about complex requirements to send notices and keep track of your deadlines. That's one complexity. Lien waivers are something we didn't really touch in the webinar too much, but it's a very similar thing. I always refer to like lien rights and notices as being at the point of sale, and then lien waivers being at the point of payment. And you only send one notice usually one notice on a project. And when you are with waivers, sometimes you have multiple waivers on a project. Now, there are multiple types of waivers, as the question mentioned. There's one called a conditional waiver, and there's another one called unconditional waiver. A conditional waiver, simply just to get the audience up to speed. A conditional waiver is a waiver that isn't effective until a condition occurs, and the condition is almost always payment. So it says, I waive my lien right, and I waive it as long as I receive $1, whatever the waiver amount is. Maybe you're getting paid $10,000. So when I receive $10,000, I waive my lien right. An unconditional lien waiver says, I've received $10,000, and therefore I waive my lien right. And it's not conditional on anything because I received payment. Now, there's a lot of intricate things here. One thing to say is that conditional lien waivers are very, very effective, very, very enforceable, and they're the thing that you want to sign almost all the time unless you have the money in the bank earning interest for you. If you don't have that money, then you should be very cautious about signing an unconditional waiver, because what you're doing when you sign the unconditional waiver is you're saying, I have received this money. You're not saying, I unconditionally waive lien rights. You're almost always saying, I received this money. That's a very dangerous thing to say if you didn't receive the money. Conditional lien waivers are just as enforceable as unconditional lien waivers. It's just that it's conditioned upon the payment. They are, you can only, and this goes back to something we mentioned earlier, which is your ability to waive rights. So this complexity between conditional and unconditional is really sensitive right now. Just in the past 3 or 4 years, 3 or 4, I think 3 states have changed their lien waiver laws to make this more clear, because there's a lot of people taking advantage of it. You likely see unconditional lien waivers all the time. And those unconditional lien waivers are not fair because they're asking you to sign away your lien rights before you receive payment. And what you see in the states that are passing laws is they're saying that that's not legal. You can't do that. You can't tell someone to waive their lien rights unconditionally unless they receive money. And even in the states that don't have the laws passed, there's a lot of court cases that support that same position. So it's, in addition to it being dangerous to the unconditional waiver to get signed, in a lot of cases it's illegal. Hope that answers that question.
All right, great. The next question we have here is, when is the best time to send preliminary notices?
When it's due. There is, between the 50 states, I think the range is, don't quote me on this, but it's definitely the shortest is in Oregon, where you have 8 days from when you start work. And the longest, interestingly enough, is its neighbor in Washington, where you have 60 days. States usually fall within those two time ranges, and that's the amount of time you have from when you first furnish materials or when you first start work. The clock starts to tick. And once the date expires, once 8 days are gone by, or 20 days have gone by, or 60 days have gone by, in half the states, that's it. You relinquish all your rights. And you can never send a notice again. So in those states, the time is like immediately. You must, when you start a project, it should just be part of the point of sale. New project, send the notice out. The other states, the other half of states, actually let you send notices late. If you do, though, the notices are only effective from when you send them, or within a certain amount of time from when you send them. You just want to be careful with that, because if you wait to send notices until when something goes wrong, frequently the notice that you send won't have effectiveness long enough to solve the problem you're having. So the best practice is to just make it part of the new project process. New project, new notice, and do it within the time that's required. There are some users of our platform that frequently set up some rules, like I want to send my notice within 3 days or 4 days of the deadline, or when my AR is past 20 days past due, something like that. And what that allows them to do is avoid sending notices on invoices that usually pay quickly, but still send it before the deadline in the event that the deadline's short. So in a state like Washington, you have 60 days. Well, maybe you want to say, I want my notices to go out on day 55, because that means that I won't have to send notices on stuff that is just going to pay anyway. I only send it on the stuff that doesn't need to pay or isn't going to pay. So you can set up, we have a lot of users who do things like that to make sure that, especially on the more sensitive accounts, that they give themselves enough time but don't step on their own toes and send it late.
All right, the next question we have here is, what can be done on a property that's been sold at sheriff's sale if the lien was filed before the sheriff's sale but was not listed at the sheriff's sale?
That's a very peculiar situation. I've seen that happen. I've also seen crazy stuff happen where we've had the government dealing with fake bonds. So sometimes on a public project, the bond will be fake, or you have, I've seen people cancel liens, like somebody file a lien and then the owner go and cancel the lien and sign for the person who filed it, like forge the signature and file it. And then you have these counties that just aren't, counties vary in the level of sophistication. Things like this happen. And it's frustrating, but it doesn't happen too often. But when those things happen, you usually have liability on a number of people's parts. So that transaction, for example, probably had a title insurance company, or a title insurance, maybe a title insurance group grant title insurance to the owner of the new owner, the one that bought the property. And sometimes you can file a lawsuit against the title insurance carrier because there is a problem with the title. They didn't find it. It was there, and they didn't go find it. So you might have a claim against the new owner. You might have a claim against the sheriff's office. You might have a claim against the title insurance company. So there's a few places you can go, but it's definitely more frustrating than the situation of you get the money. That's why you file the lien. You want the money. It's rare when it happens. There's usually some hooks there for you to go out and get compensated.
All right, the next question we have is, how would you be able to address not having to sign a conditional lien waiver? Usually in these cases, they will not release payment.
Yeah, that's a tough one. So that is precisely why some of these laws are being passed. And, there's a few things that you can do there. One is that you can you can educate the person who's trying to force you to sign an unconditional waiver. Sometimes it's not them, and it's the people above them, and sometimes you can go and educate them. You can sometimes get, depending on how much risk you want to take, maybe you can say, look, I know you want this conditional waiver, but since we haven't received payment yet, I'm going to go to the GC and ask for a joint check agreement. And you might be comfortable with the joint check agreement instead of the lien waiver right. You can do things, dig into why. Why won't they pay? And usually the reason is because they haven't gotten paid. And so that's why you go up a level and get to the GC to make sure that when the payment is issued, it gets to you. You can refuse, and you're going to be, depending on what your cash situation is or how sensitive you are to the customer, you can say, look, I know you're in this bind. I know you need an unconditional waiver, but here's the brass tacks. Brass tacks is that I haven't been paid. And if I haven't been paid, then I'm not signing this saying I have, and so go fish and come back when you're ready to sign this type of waiver. Here's my conditional one. You can bring this one up. Here's my joint check agreement. You can bring it with the conditional, and you can play more hardball. That's a tough situation. The ideal situation is we get more education, and we give people, and that's also the vision of our product, is to give people more collaborative opportunities to avoid those catch-22s. But I'll take the next question, Justin. Hope that answers that one. That's a hard one.
Okay. The next question is, why can't there be any liens on properties around government jobs or hospitals?
So when I train my employees, I always, when we train the employees, we have a little session about liens, and we put up a picture. And on one side, it's like this little blue cottage, and we say, you can lien this. Then we show the White House. You can lien this blue house, but you can't lien the White House. You can't lien the White House because the people own the White House. So it's different than private property where you can lien things. Now, hospitals are private property, and so you can file liens on hospitals, except for maybe the VA hospital, which is a federal project. But most hospitals you can file liens on. Whenever you're dealing with government projects, what the government has done is they've passed every state has this. When work is being done on a government project, the general contractor must post a payment bond, and the payment bond takes the place of the property. So instead of filing a lien against the property itself, you file a lien against the bond. And the bond is just as good, it's actually better than the property because it's just money sitting there. And those are frequently called bond claims. Some states call them liens. But it's the very same principle. It works the very same way, has the very same effect. The difference is that you can't lien, you can't take and foreclose on the White House.
All right. The next question is, do you send preliminary notices if you are the general contractor?
The answer is, in a lot of cases, yes. So in a lot of cases, no. This goes to kind of the complexity of the rules. They have a number of states that require, that the requirements for notices and the requirements for liens are different depending on which tier you are. General contractors in a lot of states must deliver preliminary notices. Chief among them are Arizona and California. Those are the two that just come right to the top of my mind. Those are the two states that have preliminary notice requirements for the GC. And it's important to send those. Otherwise, the GC loses their lien rights. And in those two states, there's actually like disciplinary rules in those two states about notices, which are, again, seldom enforced, but they're there.
All right. The next question is, could you go over a little bit more in depth how a company would go about securing their AR through liens rights?
Sure. So when you think about AR is your invoices that are out there. And let's say you don't do anything with liens right now. You have no lien policy whatsoever. It means that none of your AR is secured. If you don't get paid on an invoice, then you have one option, and that one option is to sue the person who owes you the money through an open account lawsuit or some kind of breach of contract lawsuit. And that's it. That's the end of the road. If you go into if that company files bankruptcy, then you're going to go into the bankruptcy as an unsecured creditor. That means you're likely not going to get much money at all. And the difference is secured AR. That is your invoices that are in a secured position, which means that in the event that that person, as you don't get paid on that AR, you have more options than just going after the person who was signed the contract with you or has the account with you. Now you can go up. You can actually go after the person who owns the property. You can go after the lender. You can go after the general contractor. You can get the money directly from them, and it's their problem that the person owes that money. So maybe they have $100 they paid a subcontractor. The subcontractor didn't pay the supplier, but you can make the general contractor pay $100 again, and then he has to go get the $100 from the sub instead of you going to get the $100 from the sub. The other thing is if you get into a bankruptcy situation, so if that sub or that customer files bankruptcy, you go into the bankruptcy as a secured creditor, which makes a difference. And so the idea of securing your AR is that if you have 100 invoices and 100 of them have lien rights, meaning that you sent the notice, you filed the lien, you've taken the steps. Sometimes you may not even get to the point where you filed the lien, but you've taken the steps you need to take to not lose that right. You start with that right. Day one, you put your foot on a project or you send the material to that project. That day, the law gives you a lien right and says, here you go, this is yours. And then you can lose it. So all of your invoices are secured on day one. Then you lose the security position because you don't take an action. And to the extent that you lose it, it leaves you in a position where you're unsecured and you have restricted remedies in the event payment isn't made. And when you do secure it, you have a lot of remedies when payment isn't made. And you are in a bankruptcy, you have a different position. You have the secured position.
All right, I'm not seeing any more questions, but I will give everyone a couple more minutes if they would like to get in any last-minute questions. While we are waiting, I would like to remind everyone that there is a brief survey for everyone to fill out as they exit the webinar. It will pop up on your screen. It takes less than a minute to fill out, but it gives us a lot of great insight into how we can continue to make our presentations better for you. Looks like we do have one more question here. Scott, the question is just, what would you say would be your biggest takeaway from this presentation or biggest piece of advice you could give on the topic?
So I like the polling question that we had with, I think that there's a lot of validation for how we look at the market and how we look at the complexity of dealing with lien rights. We saw that the people have different levels of how familiar they are with lien laws. They have a different, every company takes a different position on how much they protect with the lien rights. I'm just going to go through the questions. How many states does your company operate in? People have different degrees of how spread the country they are. What's the biggest challenge? The challenges are different. This is it's validation that this is a really complex thing that there is no real simple answer. And so that's one takeaway, is that there is no simple answer for a lot of this stuff, and it's complex, and people approach it differently. And that leads into kind of my biggest piece of advice regarding this process, which is it's a very powerful process. It's something that is good. It's not just a risk mitigator. It opens up the door for more sales, and it actually can improve your relationships with people on the construction project. You just have to make sure that you're going about it the right way, and you have to take advantage of the collaboration opportunities that it presents. And that means that there are no fines. There's no strict lines that you should follow. There's no strict path. The path is unique to you, and that is the way that you can turn this process into one that really benefits you. What are your challenges? What are your company's goals? And how does this process help that and help you build better relationships in the industry? And ultimately, how do you actually execute on that? And the caution is, don't execute by investing it all into one person's institutional knowledge or into manual processes that are ad hoc. You want to really think through this, and the more you think through it, and the more you work on developing a consistent way to manage it, the more payoff it'll have.
All right, well, I'm not seeing any more questions in here, so with that, I think we will wrap today's webinar. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time out of their day to join us for today's presentation. I'd also like to thank Scott for taking the time out to give this valuable presentation to everyone on today's webinar. So with that, we're going to shut it down. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thanks, Justin, and thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Scott.